The first questions people ask you in a community or culture signify what they value.
What makes up a world-class facilitator?
A healthy relationship to and understanding of power. So much of facilitation is actually figuring out connection despite obstacles.
How do you come up with magical questions?
No one has ever asked me that. Such a great question. Figure out the question that helps the group have the right conversation. Questions are a sequence of words that if you ask them in a specific way, it can open up the world. Gathering is about connection, but it's also about power. I create the gatherings I wish existed in the world, and people are now asking that question, and that's a powerful question to be asking. As much as we have tools for self-help, it is time to begin to really elevate group help.
Priya, this one has been a long time coming. Thank you so much for being here on the Learning Leader Show.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with an interesting time in your life. Your parents, they met in Iowa. They fell in love. They got married. They had you in Zimbabwe. They worked in fishing villages across Africa and Asia. Then they fell out of love, got divorced in Virginia, went their separate ways. After the divorce, you moved, this seems wild to me, you moved every 2 weeks between their households. One, a vegetarian, liberal, incense-filled Buddhist, Hindu, New Age universe. The other, a meat-eating, conservative, twice-a-week church-going, evangelical Christian realm. Whoa, okay, so that comes directly from your book. How did that type of upbringing shape you?
It made me a conflict resolution facilitator.
Tell me more about that.
My day job still is a dialogue facilitator for groups to help them have the conversations they have been avoiding, but are crucial for them to figure out their next formation. And so much of how I was raised, in part, to break it down a little bit, first of all, across two very, very different cultures. And when, I was in my teenage years, so probably like 12 to 18 before college, when I would go back and forth toggling between these two homes. But part of being part of two different cultures was it wasn't these two vague ideas. It was like deeply specific, and they were very different. So everything from the quote unquote right way or obvious way to like start a dinner. At one home, you would never put food in your mouth before saying grace. Right? At the other, the word God wasn't mentioned ever, right? There was a completely different way to start, but they both began a meal in a way that honored the table, right? Or the games that we would play, or what would be considered like what you do when you're bored. I'm sort of putting my fingers in quotes. Growing up, I also would spend a lot of summers in New Delhi. My mother is a researcher, and she would often take me to India, and she would go and conduct her research, and I would stay with my relatives. And so much of like the time we spent together, often in English called time pass, like the way you pass your time, is literally just like playing cards on the bed, or like everybody is like on the shared family bed, or playing carom. And when I would go visit my, grandparents in Iowa, that was like no one knew what carom was. And so at some deep, deep level, I've always been interested in when and why and how people come together, how they spend that time, what they think of as normal, how people can create and invent and change cultures, and then also, because of my life, how they come apart. And so I've been deeply, deeply interested in groups and in how they form and in how they break and in how they come together again. And so much of that is because of how I was raised.
Let's progress a little bit further along in your story. You go to college, and once there, I believe you met Dr. Hal Saunders. Am I pronouncing that right? Dr. Hal Saunders.
Yes, you've done your research.
What type of influence, or how did Dr. Hal Saunders influence you, and how has his work helped you today?
Dr. Saunders passed, maybe almost a decade ago, and I still think of him and what he taught me probably daily. And he was an American diplomat. He went to Princeton undergrad, I think in the 40s. He was on the National Security Council. He eventually became a top diplomat in the State Department. And he served 5 different presidential administrations. And when he was part of the Camp David Accords, brokering peace between Israel and Egypt, and was part of the what was then called shuttle diplomacy. And he basically realized that through that work at the highest level of statecraft, governments can create peace treaties. But on the ground, people's perceptions of each other still hasn't necessarily changed. And after he left government, he became part of the longest running dialogue, sort of what's called track two diplomacy, of working with citizens on the ground after wars in post-conflict states. And so much of what he saw in those days was what the power of what the government can do and the use of what the government can do, and then also the power of what citizens and civics and culture and institutions can do. And I met him. I was very frustrated with race relations. I'm biracial, as you laid out. And I went to the University of Virginia, and one of the first questions people would ask me is, "What are you?" And I was like, I didn't understand what it meant. I thought they meant like a first year, and I learned very quickly it meant racial in that context. And I learned, in part probably because my mother's an anthropologist, that the first questions people ask you in a community or culture signify what they value.
Mm.
Right. So it's like, okay, race is really important here. I grew up in all these different cultures. I grew up in these different countries. I was like, okay, good to know. And I was very frustrated with race relations at UVA. And the University of Virginia, to its deep credit, has a strong sense of what they call student self-governance, which means if you see a problem, don't complain, do something about it. And I was talking to my mother, actually, she's clearly a large part of this narrative, and told her how frustrated I was. And she knew about this man called Hal Saunders, and she said, you should email him. And I emailed him as a freshman, and I learned that he was interested in working with American students on college campuses on race relations. And I said, will you come train us? And he had been working with Princeton students as a trustee there, and he came and he trained like 12 19-year-olds in a classroom, at 2 p.m. with like, bad lighting. And he basically was this deeply, deeply curious human being
Mm.
who, even in his 70s, even in his 80s, always believed that he had something to learn. And I, as a teenager and then as a person in my 20s, had never been taken so seriously by such a person of so much power and wisdom and experience. And he trained us in sustained dialogue. We launched it September 10th, 2001. And then, of course, 9/11 happened the next day.
Wow.
And so it was one of these things where we were at the right place at the right time, where we had this container, which, by the way, can get into our gathering conversation. Like, all sustained dialogue was the name of the program. It was an invitation. When I say we launched it September 10th, 2001, that means we sent a letter out to the university announcing we were doing this thing to bring together students behind closed doors to have conversations about race that they rarely get to have with people who are unlike them. And Hal Saunders became my mentor and then my boss for the next 8 years. And I learned deeply. Facilitation is a weird field. There's no like Goldman Sachs of facilitation. It's an apprentice-based field. It's very fragmented. Particularly if you're not going to work at the State Department. And I was very lucky to be one of the people Hal Saunders took on to sort of train me as a young person in the skills of group life.
Facilitation is such an interesting thing. So I do a good bit of it within my profession now, and I never had anticipated that. And I feel like I was just thinking leading up to this conversation, like what makes a good facilitator? I mean, Priya was the perfect person to talk to, but I was thinking it through, and I just love to riff on this if you're cool with it,
Of course.
because of what I've learned over the years. And I think it's like this weird combination of being deeply curious / fascinated by people and their stories, and what it is about them that makes them unique and different, and wanting to learn from their life experiences, combined with being a fantastic listener, asking even better follow-up questions than initial questions, good body language, and then just a high level of emotional intelligence and a knack of a feel for the room, both Zoom and in person, knowing when to speak, when to add on, when to ask a question as opposed to give your point of view, when to teach, when to shut up. Like there's just a million different things. I could go on and on and on. So I'm speaking with probably maybe the best in the world or one of the best in the world at it. It's you. When I ask you that question, like what makes up a world-class facilitator, the floor is yours. I'm deeply curious. What is it?
You did very well. You did very well. I think that a facilitator, unlike a mediator, the first thing I would say is when I think of a facilitator, I really think of somebody who is interested in the life of a group.
Mm,
So I'm not when I think of a facilitator, at least the way I was sort of raised as a baby facilitator, is it's really people who are interested in the infrastructure of three or more people who need to come together and ideally are changed for the better by what transpires between them.
mm,
And a facilitator is somebody who thinks deeply about how to set up the conditions in order to increase the likelihood that that happens. And so a facilitator is somebody who thinks about, is somebody who both has a very high quality of listening, but I would add to your definition is also obsessed with and very good at language.
mm,
So there's listening to kind of, make the person feel like you are really hearing them. But then I think one of the differences between greener facilitators and more seasoned facilitators is an obsession and an ability to hear, recall, play with language. A second is, as you said, deep curiosity. But I would also say that a really good facilitator, and the difference between sort of green and more seasoned, is a healthy relationship to an understanding of power. And so even as you were saying earlier, you know when to shut up, you know when to pull people out, you know when to push back people in. A big part of that underneath is actually understanding power, right? How are decisions being made here? Who is talking more than others? When do you actually allow for that? What is my own relationship to an ability to hold the group? A third element is our own relationship to conflict and heat. So I am a conflict averse conflict resolution facilitator. Right? I'm biracial, as I said earlier, but what you may not know about me is that I'm also third generation ostrich. Which means that on both sides of my families, when conflict arises, we're really good at sticking our head in the sand. You're like, there's like nothing to see here, folks. Like, hopefully it'll just pass if no one says anything. And so a huge part of what I have tried to cultivate in myself, and I think one of the reasons when I'm effective, what really helps me is counterintuitively, I have deep empathy for the people in the room who want to flee.
mm.
So and even now when like the heat rises, if I'm facilitating a reckoning on Zoom, or if I'm facilitating a conflict and voices rise, or we start approaching like the core of it, my palms still get sweaty.
Hmm.
I can feel my heart racing. I can feel like, the blood rushing to my cheeks, and I've learned how to hold heat. And so much of facilitation, some people are like deeply have, naturally skilled at some of the elements that are important, but it's also a deeply learnable skill.
Wow. Okay. Let's say somebody is a lot less experienced than you and they're a VP of whatever at a Fortune 500 company. And one of the things they have coming up is they're going to they're going to be in charge of like a leadership offsite, let's say.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's a gathering,
Hmm.
and they're going to run a half day of it, and it's a variety of things. But basically, they're going to be up in front of the room. They may not be called a facilitator by the big boss, but essentially that's a part of their role. So that this is facilitation 101. They haven't really done it, not that experienced, maybe haven't had enough repetitions to be that good at it yet. What are some of the ways that person, like some of the foundational things they should think of and maybe even practice to get good at it faster than if they just kind of showed up and were winging it.
So first of all, don't wing it.
Yes, 100%.
And
Practice.
another one of my mentors is a woman named Rhonda Sleem. She was Hal Saunders' colleague for many, many years. She's an incredible practitioner. And one of the things she said to me, she's a Lebanese American woman, is 90% of the success of what happens in the room and as a facilitator happens before anybody arrives. And so you're a VP, you've been assigned, you've been voluntold this leadership retreat. The first most important thing to do before anything else is to determine and clarify what the purpose is. What is the purpose of this leadership retreat? A leadership retreat is just a word, it's a frame. Anything can happen in a leadership retreat. What is the deepest need? And to become a precise and effective facilitator in the room, it's almost like you're building a house. And but the construction of the house happens before anyone gets there. So what's the foundation? What does this team need? Who actually needs to be in the room? Are the right guests the ones who have been invited? Do we need to actually think about more deeply what is the right conversation for this group to have? What is the right conversation for this group to have is a simple and also a very complex question. And the conversation that, particularly if it's a leadership retreat, that your direct reports get to have in person when there's or on, virtually, but in person at the same time, at the same place is your highest real estate. And wasting your time kind of like figuring out what to say or do in the room is actually going to make you waste a lot of time. And so a huge part of preparing for that meeting is to figure out what is the right conversation for this group to have and how do I equip them to have it well.
It feels kind of like I've had a number of military leaders here, and I'll try to weave this together on the fly here, but it feels like military leaders are really good at setting mission objectives. I remember Michelle Kern, who's a fighter pilot, they're just really good at the pre-mission brief and the post-mission brief, the debrief. And that's so they basically always knew this is the goal. This is
Yes.
what we are striving to do on this mission. And then afterwards, they would debrief and learn so they could do better the next mission. It feels to me, Priya, if I wove that together, that's kind of what you're talking about is you've got to have the pre-meeting brief / additional then practice, which is a separate thing. But you got to know, what are we doing here? What's the purpose? Why are we meeting? What are our goals? What do we hope to get out of this? And I think this probably doesn't apply just for a leadership retreat. This applies for hosting a dinner at your house with friends and family, right? So maybe you could talk more about like getting really, really clear on the objective and the purpose of the meeting.
So the biggest mistake we make when we gather, and this is true for board meetings, this is true for protests, this is true for birthday parties, is we skip defining the purpose.
Mm.
And the more obvious seeming the purpose, the more likely we are to skip it. Oh, I know what a board meeting is. I know what a wedding is. I know what a Zoom is. And when we don't pause to ask what the purpose is, we end up replicating old, outdated forms. And often the wrong people are in the room. So the first thing to do absolutely is to actually, and I wouldn't even call it a pre-meeting, is to deeply, deeply ask and figure out what is the desired outcome. You have 6 hours or 2 hours or 12 hours and 8 people or 40 people. There is absolutely a sequence of things you can do in that room that fundamentally transforms their relationships to each other. It's your job to figure out, sometimes with them, what that sequence of steps is. So, for example, there was a woman I knew who ran a community hub. It was sort of a startup networking organization. It was called Hub LA. Her name was Elizabeth Stewart. It still is Elizabeth Stewart. And she really wanted to create a community for startup founders and also have it to be a place where it was truly a community and not just a place, not like a Shark Tank or a place for sales pitches. And she would host these social occasions and think about, okay, what is my deepest purpose of these evenings? And she would invite investors. And she got really clear. Her deepest purpose for that evening was not to get as many startup funders as possible funded. It was to build trust and long-lasting relationships between and across a network of people trying to start businesses and the people in the region who were wanting to support them.
Hmm.
And so she created a pop-up rule in order to protect from what happens often in a room where there's funders and VCs and startups, which is people pitch each other. And then the investors feel like they just have like dollar signs on their head and just want to, flee. Is she said, you can't talk about what you're selling. No pitches, right? Super counterintuitive rule for a networking night, but it created and it signified what it was she was trying to create. And so much of how you think about like running a meeting or running anything that is high stakes is this is a precise surgical design that we get to decide, given all these different people coming from different norms and different ways of doing things. It is your job to think about what is the purpose and then how do I set people up so that they understand what the rules are. I'm protecting them, I'm connecting them, I'm temporarily equalizing them so that we can actually coordinate. Group life and gathering is a coordination problem.
Wow. Okay. So this makes me think about one of the events I host. The primary event I host every year is for my Learning Leader Circle members, and it's usually in May. We go to a cool location like Scottsdale so we can hike and do other things. And one of the first things I say to the group when we meet is I just put a big slide that says A plus on it, and then I say this is what an A plus meeting is. This is what we're here to do. This is the purpose of our time together. And then I'll usually say two or three things, not like 10 things that you can't remember, but two or three. And so usually there's something along the lines of transformational learning. So that means learning that you intrinsically take in and then you apply. And then usually the first and most important one is that you become lifelong friends, or this is the beginning of a lifelong friendship with two or three people. Now, there are roughly 40 to 45 people there. It's not realistic to become lifelong friends with 40 people, but it is realistic to become the beginnings of a lifelong friendship relationship with two or three people. So that it's very, very clearly stated. That's why you're going to sit next to the same people both today during the day and at dinner. We're going to sit you on the bus next to them when we drive to the mountain to hike, and hopefully you walk side by side with them so that it's not about becoming surface level with 40. It's about becoming deep with a few, because I think that could be that can transform your life. My point of oversharing there, Priya, is clearly defining what an A plus is and then executing on that so that they know, oh, this was all intentionally done. So when I share all of that, I would love for you, again, as maybe the best in the world at this, to say, yeah, that's good, but maybe you should think about this. Or I would just be curious to get your thoughts on that kind of experiential design, goal setting, and then trying to execute on that.
It's such a great example. And I first I'll just sort of break down what it is you're doing.
Okay.
So every gathering is a social contract, right? So your listeners may be listening right now and be like, ugh, he's putting people next, I have to sit next to the same person on the bus every day. Like, who is he to tell me where I'm going to sit? I'm not a 12-year-old,
Yeah.
right? But because you are basically creating a temporary constitution, right? I'm trained in political and social theory, so excuse the nerdiness, but this is basically what it is. Every gathering is a temporary constitution. It's a dinner party, bring a bottle of wine, right? Or if it's implicit, people find out that they've broken the constitution by like wow, they didn't even bring a housewarming gift, right? We have all of these implicit norms, and often in diverse groups, which is every leadership circle, right? And I'm not even meaning racially diverse or ethnically diverse. I'm just saying we come from different assumptions of how a meeting is run.
Yep.
Right. So what you have done here as the leader of this offsite is first you've laid out your expectations. You are using the language of A plus. That may or may not resonate with them. That's your job as a leader to figure out what feels aspirational and what feels, is no longer working language wise. And then you are using your power, right? So a huge part of hosting is using your power, realizing you have power, but using it for the good of the group to achieve its purpose. So you then explain the design. Hey, part of A plus is transformational learning. In my mind, Ryan, that's your job. You're almost like, I don't know as a guest how to be transformed by the learning. I just know that I'm supposed to maybe listen or engage in a way that like it increases the likelihood. But the part where you're signaling to me as a guest of what my role is it's 2 to 3 lifelong friends. Okay, right? Okay, interesting. There's 40 people here. You're literally kind of giving me like a navigation map. It's like, okay, so I have 6 hours here. This is really helpful. My leader, whom assuming I think is legitimate, which is the question, right,
Mm.
is
Sure.
saying, okay, so success here is over the next few. Okay, I don't have to spend my time distributing it everyone equally 38. I am purposely going to try to focus on 2 or 3 people. Got it, right? That changes my orientation. But the second thing is lifelong. I talked earlier about facilitators are really listening to language. Lifelong is an interesting assumption, right? It's also saying I don't need to tell them everything from the get-go. Or it may be like, wow, lifelong friendship. That means after I leave this place, we're still supposed to be friends.
Oh
That
yeah.
changes my assumption of the conversations I have on that hike. So much of what you're doing there is you're tightening and clarifying what the social contract is, and that
Hmm.
is really helpful. And the last thing I'll just say is people might like stage a coup, right? They may say, this is not what we're here for. We're not supposed to be lifelong friends. I don't want to share everything. I think it's inappropriate for work, but that's data. And so,
Mhm.
so much like leadership, so much is basically creating and setting a social contract, inviting and seeing who is absolutely up for it, and then watching the data in and out and creating a relational model where people are wanting to give up some amount of power to be able to be part of something greater than themselves. And they trust you to help run it.
Hmm. So part of what we do as well is we go and work with like leadership teams, me and a couple of my teammates, my coaches, and we like to start those by letting them know what we're going to do and why we're going to do it by the end of that day. And sometimes it's just the beginning of a relationship where it starts in person, then we're going to meet whatever we meet throughout the course of the year on Zoom, in person, whatever. I'm just curious, is there ever a time where you shouldn't do that, where you should say, like, no, let's just go and do what we do? Or is laying out clearly the purpose and the why, or like, did they need to know all of that? Like, this is a real kind of like, I'm not really sure
Yeah.
question. This is what we do. I personally, when I went to college, I did better than when I did in high school because, as weird as this sounds, they give you a syllabus in college on the first day of class. And on that syllabus, I see everything we're going to do. I see due dates. I can work ahead if I want to. I love
Yeah.
knowing what we were going to do. I love seeing the schedule. I love seeing what we're learning, the topics. I love seeing if I could work ahead, right? As a student athlete, so I knew I was time crunched at time. Hey, I got a little extra time. Let's work ahead, right? So I've learned from that and try to implement into that the work when I'm working with people is like, I think people enjoy knowing where we're headed. Let's just tell them. But again,
Yeah.
you're the master. This is what do you think about that?
It depends on the context.
Okay.
And there are moments for surprise. There are moments for whimsy and delight. There are moments where, again, it depends on what the purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
If a team is so stuck and in a, say, a 50-year-old institution, they've always done it the exact same way, and if they don't change, they're going to die institutionally. And what you actually need them to do is build and expand their own skills for discomfort and change.
Mm.
If that's the purpose, right, very specifically, then perhaps one of the practices you're doing as a team, which again, maybe you tell them, maybe you don't, is helping them do exercises over the course of a 3-day retreat in which they don't know what the path is. Because that the purpose is to expand their ability to navigate uncertainty.
Ah, good call. Yeah.
So in, particularly in diverse learning environments, and so many of your questions are also at some level about pedagogy and, education specialists would be an amazing addition to this conversation. But so much of it, so much of what you are doing is what you're talking about, making it explicit, laying out one's expectations. There are showing the roadmap. That is deeply beneficial to particularly to people with less power and knowledge in the room.
Gotcha.
It is people who, for newer people who don't know how things work, right? It's true for people who might have other obligations, whether it's tending to an elderly parent or whether it's being a student athlete and having very fixed, you had less flexibility, I imagine,
For
than
sure.
people who weren't student athletes. And so therefore it's actually equalizing to people who have, you know, student work, right? Say I work in the library 5 times a week and I have to plan my schedule ahead of time. So much of what you're talking about, all of these are design choices, but there's certain design choices that help, particularly when it's transparent and clear, equalize the room. But that may not always be your purpose.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's get practical from a personal perspective. And I'm fascinated by how you run these things. So let's say you and your spouse want to host a dinner and drinks party, kind of basic, wherever, could happen anywhere. And you're going to have over 5 couples. Okay. Maybe you'll tell me that's too many or too little, whatever. Okay. 5 couples. You all know each other already. Maybe some are closer than others, like most social groups, but for the most part, you all know each other. And the goal of the night is we want to laugh. We want to have a good time. We want to create memories. We want to get closer together. That's the goal, because everyone's crazy busy with kids and sports and life. And before you know it, if you don't plan these things, they just don't happen, right? So that's what we want to do. Okay. And this is real life for me, right? This is my life. So from you,
You're like asking for a friend.
I'm asking for myself. Okay. What are the keys from the very start of the invitation till the last person leaves the house and whatever happens afterwards? What are the keys to hosting like an amazing dinner party with a handful of couples that you don't intentionally spend enough time? You don't do a good enough job intentionally spending time together outside of all your kid stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to pause and say first, and I always say this, which is first ask what is the purpose and what is our need and what is it that we most want, even before the structure of the dinner party, as annoying as that might seem.
Okay.
And one of the things I heard you say is like, these are people who you kind of see, they all know each other,
Right.
and we really want to have a great time and laugh hysterically.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the goal, a dinner party may not be the best form.
Okay.
A dinner party, and then we'll go to the dinner party. But a dinner party is like you're often seated down. You're often like it really, really depends on the conversation. It really depends on like if also in some ways it's almost easier to have a beautiful conversation with strangers than it is with people who have known each other for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
People who've known each other for a long time also like aren't willing to like, oh, here's Ryan's like magical question again. Like, like they like dunk on each other versus like someone being like, yeah, absolutely. I'll answer, a question about from my childhood or, whatever it is. So the first thing I'd say is if the goal is to like revive a friendship group, like really think about like it might actually make more sense to play a kickball game in the park. It might actually make more sense to go and like book out a pickleball court for 2 hours and stage a made up pickleball championship, like and teach it and have everyone and like put people into teams of 2. If it's like fun and laughter and doing something different and having some people deeply remember it, it might be going to like a morning rave and go to Daybreaker in your city and say like this is what I want to do. Will be done before break. So the first thing I would just really say, and I sound like a broken record, and whether you think about work or pleasure, is really pausing before form and saying what is our deepest need, and then pausing and saying what is it that like gives me energy. I recently launched a Substack called Group Life, and we do these group help sessions every 2 weeks where I get on Zoom live with group lifers. And the second session we did was called Throw a Gathering, How to Host a Gathering You Actually Want to Attend.
Mm.
So the first question I would ask you, Ryan, is do you want to throw a dinner party?
I don't know.
Like, right? It's like we're so boxed into thinking about like how adults and couples must hang out.
That's a great point.
And so the first thing I would just think about is like, do you want to actually go bowling, or do you want, again, because I'm listening to what you said, which is fun and laughter and joy. Yeah. Do you want to go for a dance party? Do you want to go and have like tea in your grandmother's china on a picnic blanket in the river?
Yeah, one of the most recent ones we did in this kind of realm was party bus concert, and man, It was.
Amazing,
It hit
right?
all. It checked all those boxes.
Yes.
There's no real dinner. Maybe some snacks, but like it was. It was some beverages and a bus and a good driver and music and
Yes.
yeah. And so
And so
yeah.
similarly,
Yeah.
or with a dinner party, again, if you, this is why I'm saying really, and if, like anyone listening to this, like really pause and ask, like, what is it that I most need, or what is it that the group most needs? And like that's a leadership skill, that's discernment.
Yes.
And then ask, okay, and if it's like what I most want is to become a great dinner party host, then throw a dinner party, right? There's nothing wrong with dinner parties, but it's just one of many forms of connection.
Do you like hosting dinner parties?
I do like hosting dinner parties, and I like it because my husband is a great cook.
So
So,
when you host dinner parties, do you guys cook normally?
yes, we cook, and I will say my husband, I'm very fortunate, does most of the cooking. I think about the meaning, and he thinks about the nourishment.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
so for a dinner party, the quick and dirty, as I think like keep it relatively simple. And so, I mean, some of the things we've seen is often like people will enjoy. We're Indian American. Like people, some of our most successful dinner parties is literally like a big vat of biryani, like chicken biryani, one dish with like yogurt on the side, and then like just like a night of like stories and laughter, and continue. Maybe you have some desserts versus like 12 dishes. And so on a dinner party, really think about what's the menu and what's the menu. I'll tell you from my lens because I really do. I'm not thinking about the food. The food matters, but what to come to me with is the meaning making. So the first is when you think about the food and what you want to serve, think about something that tells a story. Think about something that you can relatively easily accomplish. So it could be, again, like when you increase the meaning dial, it decreases the pressure on the quality of the food. So for example, I could say, I'm trying to think of an example. Like I grew up. This is a true story. I grew up. My paternal grandparents, Ruth and Lyle Parker, were simple working class people who lived in Waterloo, Iowa. And whenever I would go and visit them, they would make me BLTs. And they made like my grandmother made the perfect BLT, and she like they had a garden in their backyard, and it wasn't just like a small garden. It was like rows and rows and rows of cabbage and tomatoes and corn, and not corn. And I was like that was not happening. And I grew up, and I have this deep visceral memory of her BLTs, right? And if I am hosting and I don't, and my husband's not going to cook, I can send an invitation, come enjoy my best attempts at Ruth's BLTs. The invitation matters, right? I tell the story in the email. I narrow the expectations, right? This is for BLTs. If you don't eat BLTs, maybe this is not the party for you. You can take out the bacon if you're vegetarian, right? But like it's a social contract, right? No, please don't bring your mushroom penne, right? No, please don't in this context. And so much of what ends up happening is, again, you want to increase the dial menu, and and all I ask you to bring, if you think about what to bring a story of a dish that takes you back to childhood.
Mm,
It creates the whole night. It's
yeah.
done. It's a play that plays itself.
Yeah. The little thing, I mean, that sounds like such a little thing, but it's actually a pretty big thing. Bring a dish that, because then you're probably gonna get an amazing story, and you get a room full of those, and that creates a lot of connection, some
Yes.
vulnerability, probably.
Yes. You're
This may be
priming them, you're helping them think about their own social anxiety. Okay,
and
that's
it's
all I
probably
need to
stuff like they
do.
don't
And
talk about that much.
yes. And
Yeah.
particularly for a group that knows each other well,
Yeah.
actually, particularly for adult friends, like so much of the patterns of communication end up being about like what is happening in current life.
Yeah.
And so one very simple way to refresh a friend group is to find ways that to tell stories that people have never heard of before. And again, if you want to have a dinner party and just like come and hang, do that. But so much of what I think of is like, how do you meaningfully focus a group in a way that they want to be focused? So another very simple tool, I talk about this a lot on my Instagram, and if you all can go to Priya Parker on Instagram, and there's a whole circle there about this idea, but it's called magical questions. So magical question is, this is what I think of as a magical question. It's for a group. Um, it's a question that everyone in the group is interested in answering, and everyone in the group would be interested in hearing each other's answers. Right? It's a magical equation, and it's subjective. It's relative, right? So I have a daughter. My poor children know this practice very well. I the other day I was t parenting, solo parenting. My husband is traveling. I was solo parenting my kids and their nephews. So it was me and three kids. And they started like, it was dinner, it was a Saturday night, and they started just like arguing about what movie they were going to watch that night. And I was thinking, like, this is not my Saturday night. This is not going to be my Saturday night. And so I paused and I'm like, okay, let's ask a magical question. And they know what a magical question is. And my daughter, 7 years old, she thought, and she goes, I have one. What's the naughtiest thing you've ever done that was worth it? Right? And like we laughed and we talked and we shared and we were there for 2 hours and I heard stories that they had done and they had stories that I had done. Recently, we went to visit my father. Again, so much of facilitation is actually figuring out connection
Mm,
despite obstacles, right? Figuring
mm,
out connection despite obstacles. One obstacle in many groups and particularly in families is age, intergenerational connection. I recently visited my elderly father in Florida, and again, I was with my children. I was like, let's ask a magical question. This time my son said, I have one. What's the meanest thing you ever did to anybody
wow.
before the age of 15?
Hmm.
Right? And I'm like, I have literally never heard this question before. Like this is why it's a learnable skill. You can teach this to your teams. You can teach this to your teenagers. And we all heard stories of one another. And what was so interesting is he caveated it by saying before the age of 15, which actually temporarily equalized the group. So the 78-year-old, right, and the 40-something-year-old and the under 10-year-olds were relatively equalized, and we all shared a memory from when we were kids. And so part of thinking about connection, whether it's at a dinner party or anything else, is how do you when the mechanism for connection is conversation, which is not always, you can go dancing, you can play a soccer game, there's so many ways to connect. But when it's conversation, asking a magical question is a very powerful tool.
What are some of your other favorite magical questions?
One that I love to ask, and I actually do this virtually on Zoom a lot. As a facilitator, a huge part of my growth, maybe ironically, was during the pandemic. And so much of all of the groups I used to facilitate, right? The reckonings, the organizational, complicated conversations, it would always be in person. And the pandemic hit and everything moved onto Zoom. And as you know, there were a lot of reckonings on Zoom. And I was a facilitator who was brought in along with my peers to facilitate those. And all of a sudden, I realized that my skill, my job as a facilitator, I no longer had the tools that I had to run after somebody leaving a room, right? To chase them into the bathroom and knock on the door and convince them to come back out. To use my body to signal that it's like time to start quieting down. Like I was like in a little green square, right? And so much of the single most important tool that I have learned as a facilitator of virtual groups is to create psychological togetherness.
Hmm.
How do you create psychological togetherness when people aren't in the same room? And actually, in group life, my Substack, I am doing my next session is literally on this. My single most important skill as a facilitator is creating virtual togetherness, psychological togetherness in a Zoom. And one of my biggest tools is magical questions. I promise I'm answering a question. And my favorite question to ask of any group, and I do this all the time. I do this in organizations. I do this when I'm speaking for a speaking engagement to a company. I'm doing it for conferences, 3,000 people, 50 people. As I ask in the chat, I say, open up the chat. And I just want to get a sense. You often can't see everybody, right? But it's like an imaginative community. I just want to get a sense of who's here. Okay, so open up the chat. Let's warm up our chat. And I want you to tell me, think a moment. What was the first concert you ever went to, comma, and who took you?
Hmm.
And people pause, and then all of a sudden you see this like waterfall of answers. Bonnie Raitt, Madonna, Michael Jackson, New Kids on the Block, Nicki Minaj, and Bob Dylan, and so a couple of things are happening. First, Everyone is super interested in seeing everyone else's answers, but there's so much data and context. Who's here? Wow, I didn't realize they were that old. Or, oh my gosh, their first concert was my first concert. You also realize everyone has someone behind them. My sister, my mother, my dad, my older brother, my college girlfriend, right? All of a sudden, it expands your notion of who's there. But finally, particularly if you ask this at the opening, and openings really matter, how you actually create a community or a group, you're also increasing the likelihood that everyone else is realizing, oh, these are real people here and there's real context. And by the way, when the going gets tough, when there's some miscommunication on the team, as there is in everyone, I'm more likely to pick up the phone and call them because how bad could they be? Their first concert was a New Kids on the Block concert, right? So all of this is like you're stitching together a community to, if not be lifelong friends, to be resilient in the trenches people who know enough data about each other that make them real and human, that's appropriate for a work context, that helps people realize, hey, I know something about this person. I can pick up the phone.
Wow. Tom Petty, seventh grade, my dad. It was awesome. I was kind of like in shock actually of how cool it was that I didn't really know what to do. He probably thought I wasn't having fun, but I actually was blown away. Anyway, how do you come up with magical questions? What's your process? Do you just come up with a ton of questions and then throw out the bad ones like a lot of creativity works? Or what is your process? Because I don't want to just give people the questions. I want to help people create the muscle so that they can come up with magical questions.
I do too. You know, no one has ever asked me that. It's such a great question. So I would say I do it in a couple of different ways. The first is I practice. Like I test a lot out, and I test a lot out on my own team, right? And in part because they have the shared purpose of figuring out magical questions that we then share online. So the first is I test and I practice and I really think about, again, it's not rocket science, but I think every single time I think, and I'll be sitting there feeling hostess heat at a dinner party and being like, okay, well, how do I ask a question? Right. And again, I was like, what is a question? This entire room, this unique group, like my best friend from college, but also our neighbor, but also my husband's sister would all be interested in answering, right? That's like social arithmetic. It means what do they have in common? What don't they have in common? What's the right level of vulnerability? And that they would all be interested in answering.
Hmm.
Right. And so I just ask that question over and over and over again. It's a muscle. And then I also ask my community. So on Group Life on Substack, I actually on the chat recently, I asked what's a magical question that you love, and people share all sorts of magical questions that they love. On Instagram, I ask people to send me magical questions, and my DMs are full of magical questions, and then we put them together. And when somebody recently, I'm just gonna see if I can find it. Somebody recently sent me a DM from Brazil and he said, I've tried this magical question. Let me see if I can find it. I've tried this magical question in my group and it leads to very heated debates. Hold on, let me see if I can find it.
Love that you're creating some tension here with a little bit of delay. Let's find a
Yeah,
DM.
exactly. Oh,
Here we
I
go.
found it. I
Okay.
found it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
you can judge if this is magical or not. So again,
Okay.
this is from his um for his group, Brazilian guy. I got one magical question that has been around my friend group since high school. Are you ready for it?
I am.
Would you rather spend 10 minutes on the moon or 1 year traveling through Europe?
Mm.
It is a close-ended question, but it inspires heated debates, right? And
Wow.
so I know I'm like they literally made that up for that group. It might be super interesting for me. Questions that I love the concert question, a question that recently different mediums are good for different questions. So a question that did really well on Instagram like went totally viral in this way that I'm like, what the heck? So this is why I keep saying like test, be curious. It was, um, what's the strangest thing you ever found in your pocket? Right? And people are like,
Really? Like,
yes,
I'm kind
like
of drawing a
people are
blank.
like, we're like everything from like the little retainer screw, like a child's retainer screw. Any parents who have children, or if you ever have like an expander, to like I don't know, like guitar pick to like glitter from a concert. But it just did really well. If that would that do well in a room? I don't know. I'll just say one more thing, which is this leadership ability to begin to deeply, I mean, one of the core skills of facilitation, and it's a muscular skill, is once you know what the need or the purpose of the group is to figure out the question that helps the group have the right conversation.
Mm.
So I have a digital course, Art of Gathering digital course. It's a 6-week course. It's pre-recorded. People take it as teams. You can go on my website, check it out, priyaparker.com. And one of the practices we have in that digital course is how do you connect a group across power dynamics? And this is an example from that course. It was a healthcare conference. It's a healthcare meeting. And in the room was a massive hierarchy. It was the CEO of the healthcare company, it was researchers, it was nurses, it was anesthesiologists, it was interns, it was residents. And the purpose of the meeting was to analyze a meta data set of maternal mortality rates. Okay, this is quite heady stuff, but basically maternal mortality rates. I want to actually show you the sophistication of like why this is such muscular work as a facilitator. So in this room is a massive hierarchy, and they needed to literally read data about maternal mortality and make meaning of it and figure out what they wanted to do across all of these stakeholders. And the facilitator had the task in the first hour to equalize the group. So in my course, I say, okay, this is like lesson 4. Take a moment and write down. If you were the facilitator in the room, you had an hour and you had to ask one question that would help people, everyone would answer, that would temporarily equalize the group. What would it be? Okay. Do you want to try, Ryan, or should I tell you what they did?
Hmm. Go ahead, tell me.
Okay. So this is the question they asked. What is something about your mother or mother figure that you couldn't tell by looking at her?
Mm.
Right? This is a brilliant question for the need of the group. Why? Because first of all, it's temporarily equalizing. Everyone in that room, including the CEO, is a child of somebody, has a mother or mother figure, right? It's temporarily equalizing. Second, they're looking at metadata, right? Which means a lot of microdata has been kind of summarized. So when you're looking at a data set, part of what they're doing is priming that what is something about your mother that you can tell by looking at her, right? It's expanding their own context. And so they ran this question and it completely transformed the group, but it wasn't gratuitous. It fundamentally served the desired outcome of the room, which is to use all of these stakeholders who come from many different places to look at each other with respect, to look at the context, the data with context, and to be able to have a high enough trust to have a complex conversation with care.
So good. Can I run one by you? A magical
Yes.
question that I ask
Yes.
every year. Okay. So let me set the stage of how this our dinners go when we're at this growth summit. Again, with 40-ish people, we go out to a nice, usually like a steakhouse type place, and we get a private room. And in between the main course and the dessert, I tell the people this ahead of time, the host and the restaurant, so they know what's going on. In between those two courses, I get up and give like a very mini talk, and then I say, "Here's what we're going to do." I have this box of cards, and each card is a question, and you're each going to answer two questions. And I have them all stand up and do this. And I go person to person and like usually make a little comment about the person or something, not too long, but and then they all answer one question, which is the same. And this is the champagne question. I'm curious if this is one you use. I got it from Jason Gaynard, by the way. Everything I've gotten, I've learned from somebody else. None of it's really original. So anyway, I ask them all the champagne question, and then I give them a card. And sometimes I'll just pick randomly from the box. But anyway, the champagne question is, Priya, we're meeting exactly 1 year from today, and we are popping bottles.
Beautiful.
Popping bottles, right? Champagne, going crazy, celebrating. What are we celebrating?
That's a beautiful question.
Right? Champagne questions or grape juice doesn't, whatever. Like it just goes
Yeah.
better if you say champagne. So
Yeah.
So then they have to sit there and think about, like, what does a successful year look like? What's a big goal? What's something they want to accomplish? Oh, I want to publish a book, like whatever. Okay. And then the card questions. So they all answer that. And
But
like,
can I say one of the reasons why that's so good? It's
please,
not only because it's both future oriented and again, for the group, it's thinking about goals. But why are you popping champagne? That's a visceral thing, right? You pop, it's an emotional reaction. It's a non-obligatory reaction, right? You could say like, what is your, you know,
goal in a year.
goal for
That's
the
lame.
year,
Yeah. It's boring.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus, and so part of the power of it is it's almost like a somatic, right? It's like a physical question
Yeah.
that helps people get closer.
You can
Again,
see
going
it.
back to like,
You can
you can see
feel it.
it, you
You
can
can see
feel
it.
it, you can say like, you're also like not going to pop champagne about something that's boring.
Correct.
So it's a great question. Okay, keep going.
Forces you to think big, right? Yeah, you don't like some of them. Last time they popped a bottle of champagne, maybe have been like their wedding, and
Totally.
for some that have been like a decade or more. The second part is I created a box again. Got this from Jason Gennard. He runs Mastermind Talk, so he hosts events. I learned it from him a decade ago, and he's remained a friend. And I've gone to like 5 or 6 of his events. So anyway, you get a box of cards, and you hand make these cards. You can use moo.com or whatever, and they're colored actually intentionally. So the lighter shaded cards are kind of light, loose, no big deal questions, like basic that it's not a lot of vulnerability, but the cards get progressively darker. And the darker the shade of the card, the more vulnerability it will force you to answer. And so this gives me flexibility as the host to know, I don't know if this group we should go that deep right now. Like,
Yeah.
let's stay lighter. And I have like 100 of them. So I don't use all of the cards. And so sometimes if maybe it's a smaller group or it's a group where we know each other better or we feel like, yeah, we can go there, I'll go a little bit darker, right? I'll get a little bit darker. So you have, again, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of help, there's a lot of intentionality, but the questions on the cards, then they read it, and a lot of times they've never answered that question before. So they also never answer the champagne question. So they're answering 2 questions. They have to think on their feet a little bit, and sometimes what they say surprises themselves, let alone everybody in the room. And so again, a heavy facilitation, a lot of intentionality, a lot of planning. Nobody till this year understood the shades of the colors of the cards. I just told them, and they're like, oh wow, there really is a lot of thought put in this. I go, yes, there is. And so sometimes when they go back, they're like, oh, I got a darker card, he must like trust me or something even more. So it's interesting to see what people put into it when you tell them about, like, yeah, this is why we do this. And I think people really appreciate it, and they do, like, they feel like a sense of togetherness after we leave that dinner, after going through that kind of moment where we all answer questions together.
It's very effective. And I think part of, again, the responsibility, gathering is about connection, but it's also about power.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in a work context, using your role as a host to also protect your guests and making sure that the questions you ask are related to the purpose of
Yeah,
the convening, right? And so you can ask questions that are too vulnerable for a work context.
for
You
sure.
can ask questions that aren't related to or shouldn't be asked. That would be a much better question for, a group of friends. And when you are skilled at deeply thinking about, what is the purpose, like even asking something as simple as, particularly for groups that have been together for a long time, what's a memory, what's a core experience from your early life that you think connects to why you do the work you do today?
Hmm.
Right? Again, it's like it helps people understand people's motivation, but you're not saying like, what's telling me any experience from your early childhood. No, 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 no. It's like connecting, like, why are you an activist at this organization? Or why are you an accountant? Or what is it why are you a ballet instructor? Right? And so much of, I mean, we're sort of ending where we began, which is
Mm-hmm.
I mean, questions are a sequence of words that if you ask them in a specific way, it can open up the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Being genuinely curious and fascinated about people and their
Yes.
stories and their life experiences will change your life.
Yes.
Full stop.
Absolutely.
Will change
Full
your
stop.
life. Well, I got to ask you. I meant to ask you this earlier, Priya. This is a little bit of a departure to end, but I'm curious. You write The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. Again, a life-changing, transformational book that went mega viral.
Thank you.
How did it change your life? Like, what happened when that came out, and all of a sudden, like millions of people are talking about it, are reading it, are implementing it. It's changing their lives. Like, what did that do for you in your life?
You know, what was interesting is before the book came out, so much of what I felt like I did as a facilitator and would also like be so frustrated with in rooms when I could just see like, oh, if they would just, all the ingredients are here, if they would just protect their guests, or all the ingredients are here, if they would just like ask this question, or if they just raise a toast and tell people why they're here, it would be so good. Writing a book is like you get to write what like deeply frustrates you and like can try to convince other people it should frustrate them too. And
Yes.
so one of the things that writing this book and having it really take was that like I grew people's frustration in mediocre gatherings. And that
Mm,
was that I grew
I love
people's
that.
lens to see like this could be so much better. Our time is so short and precious. And by the way, like I can do this. Like I say this in the beginning of The Art of Gathering. It's like anyone can gather. It's like that movie Ratatouille, anyone can cook.
Hmm.
Anyone can gather. And one of the things I learned in interviewing the 100 gatherers I interviewed was like many of them identified as introverts.
Hmm.
These are gatherers other people credit with creating transformational gatherings consistently. So many of them identify themselves as loners, their language, often on the outside of things, introverts, having social anxiety. And they often, as one person said to me, I create the gatherings I wish existed in the world, and other people seem to like it. And so, what has been so beautiful for me, and kind of honestly like a relief, is that people are starting to get fed up with and expect better of how the most precious thing we have is how do we spend our time together, and to realize and to give the radical permission that we can change it with some thought, with some temerity, with some bumping around in relationship, in conversation. And that has been beautiful. And the last thing I'll say is strangely the pandemic made the book even more relevant because The Art of Gathering, the paperback came out April 2020. Super awkward. The gathering was banned, it was illegal. And part of what happened with the pandemic is that by taking gathering from us, we began to see it. We began to see that this thing that we took for granted shapes our lives, right? How do we wed now? How do we fight battles in court now? How do we host funerals? How do we host a gala? What is this thing? And so part of what has been very interesting is and very, very helpful is as a conflict resolution facilitator, I know that first groups, things begin to change when you can get a group or a community to go back to first order questions, which is when and where and why should we meet and who decides? And people are now asking that question. And that's a powerful question to be asking.
Wow. This is awesome. Where can we go to learn more about you online, Priya?
Thank you so much for asking me. Thank you for having me. You can go to Group Life. Actually, sorry, that's not the right website.
Okay.
You can go to www.priyaparker.substack.com. So I have a Substack. It's called Group Life. And we've actually created a special page for you all. It's priyaparker.substack.com/learning leader.
Let's go.
And we're offering your audience a 15% discount code. So learning leader and group life is really my attempt to I just started it. It's a Substack. And I started it because we are awash in self-help. We have so many for decades. We have tools for self-help. We have apps. We can count our steps. We can count the amount of sugar we intake. We don't have a lot of tools for group help.
Mm.
And we have a crisis of group life. And so group life is my attempt as a Substack uh, to begin to demystify and be part of what I call a group life and group help revolution. So, as much as we have tools for self help, it is time to begin to really elevate group help. And part of what I do on the Substack is every 2 weeks, it's the first time I've ever offered this to the public, is I teach. I do live sessions based on questions from the audience on Zoom. If you become a group lifer, you can come and we get to go deep on many of these juicy questions together. So thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's been you're a wonderful host. Thank you for modeling so many of these principles.
Well, thank you. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, Priya.
Thank you so much. I would too.